The streets of Scottsdale, Arizona, were quiet in the early hours of August 17, 2020. The darkness was thick, illuminated only by sporadic streetlights and the occasional passing car. The stillness was routine for Kevin Bingham, a seasoned police sergeant who had grown accustomed to the uneventful monotony of the midnight shift. His cruiser idled in an empty parking lot, its engine softly purring as he reviewed his log for the night. The air was warm, the kind of stifling heat Arizona was infamous for, and Kevin had rolled down his windows to let in what little breeze he could catch. It started as a faint sound, so faint that Kevin nearly dismissed it as a trick of the wind. But as the seconds stretched, the noise grew more distinct. It wasn't something he could immediately identify. It rose and fell, shifting between a high-pitched wail and a guttural screech. The sound seemed to hang in the air, distorted and echoing, as if trapped in some unseen chamber. It was unsettling, the kind of sound that prickled the skin and stirred unease deep in the gut. Kevin straightened in his seat, his senses sharpening. He leaned out of the open window, scanning the area. The parking lot was surrounded by the quiet facades of suburban life. An elementary school, a baseball field, rows of houses, and an apartment complex in the distance. The neighborhood was as unremarkable as any other. And yet, the sound persisted. It didn't belong here, not in the calm veneer of this sleeping community. The more Kevin listened, the stranger the sound became. At first, he thought it might be an animal, perhaps a feral cat or a bird in distress. But there was something disturbingly human about the tone, as though it were a scream dragged out of a throat not entirely capable of producing one. It wasn't consistent, wavering between notes of panic and anguish. It didn't help that the echo distorted its origin, making it impossible to pinpoint where it was coming from. Kevin's instincts stirred, the kind of reflex honed from years of responding to emergencies. Someone or something needed help. Without hesitation, he shifted the cruiser into drive and pulled out of the lot. His headlights cut through the shadows, and the tires rolled over the asphalt with deliberate purpose as he began his search. Navigating the quiet streets, Kevin kept his windows down, ears straining to follow the elusive sound. It grew louder the further he drove, confirming he was heading in the right direction, but it remained impossible to trace. The echo seemed to bounce off buildings, scattering the origin like an auditory mirage. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. The road ended at a sprawling health club, its silhouette imposing against the night sky. A tall brick wall surrounded an outdoor pool area attached to the fitness center. Kevin slowed the cruiser and parked near the entrance, cutting the engine. The sound was louder now, almost piercing, and seemed to emanate from beyond the barrier. He stepped out of the vehicle and stood still, letting the silence of the night wrap around him. The screeching sound came again, this time with a clarity that sent a chill down his spine. It was coming from within the enclosed pool area. Kevin approached the brick wall, his flashlight in hand. The beam swept over the surface, but the wall stood solid and impenetrable. He moved closer, pressing an ear against the cool stone. The sound was unmistakable now, and it carried with it a chilling intensity. It didn't sound like an animal anymore. It sounded human. Desperation and pain laced each piercing note, creating an unsettling urgency. He scanned the perimeter, searching for a way inside. There was no obvious entry point, no open gates or low sections of the wall to climb. His mind worked quickly, considering his options. As he circled the wall, a faint movement caught his eye. Two figures emerged from the fitness center, their uniforms marking them as the cleaning staff. Kevin straightened, watching them walk toward the parking lot, seemingly unperturbed by the noise that filled the air. The sound rose again, cutting through the quiet like a jagged knife. It was sharper now, closer. Kevin's gaze shifted back to the wall. Something or someone was in there and they needed help. Kevin walked toward the fitness center, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The muffled screeching persisted, carrying a haunting resonance that refused to be ignored. The vast health club loomed in front of him, a complex of concrete and glass with an air of stillness that felt out of place. The building was closed for the night, its large windows dark and reflective. The parking lot was empty except for his cruiser and a couple of vehicles likely belonging to the cleaning staff he had just seen. He approached the main doors of the fitness center and glanced around. His instincts told him the sound wasn't coming from inside the building, but rather the area behind it, the outdoor pool. The pool complex was surrounded by a 12-foot brick wall, its height and solidity ensuring privacy and security. Yet now, it seemed to serve as an impenetrable barrier between Kevin and whatever was making the chilling noise. Turning away from the main entrance, Kevin traced the perimeter of the wall, moving slowly, his flashlight casting long, wavering shadows on the ground. The screeching grew louder as he neared the back of the complex. It was not a constant sound. Instead, it came in bursts, each cry punctuated by brief moments of silence. The stillness between the cries was almost worse, as though the world held its breath in uneasy anticipation of the next wail. Kevin reached a corner of the wall where the sound seemed most pronounced. He paused and craned his neck, trying to see over the imposing structure, but it was no use. The wall offered no gaps or vantage points, only an unbroken expanse of brick. He pressed his ear against the cool surface and listened intently. The cries were unmistakably human now, each one infused with desperation and pain. The echo inside the enclosed space made it impossible to determine the exact source, but Kevin was certain it was coming from within. Stepping back, he turned his flashlight toward the ground, searching for any signs of disturbance. A footprint, a drag mark, anything that could explain how someone might have entered. The hard-packed dirt and sparse gravel revealed nothing. The area was eerily pristine, devoid of the usual litter or debris one might expect near a public space. He continued his search along the length of the wall, his movements careful and methodical. Reaching the end of the wall, Kevin stopped and surveyed the surroundings. Behind the fitness center, the pool area was shrouded in darkness, save for a few dim security lights mounted high on the wall. Their glow barely reached the edges of the building, leaving the area beyond in near total darkness. He swept his flashlight beam along the top of the wall, looking for signs of movement, but the brick surface remained silent and unmoving. As the screeches intensified, Kevin's sense of urgency deepened. The cries were coming from someone in distress, someone who needed help. He shifted his focus back to the fitness center itself, hoping to find a way to access the pool area from within. He recalled seeing the two cleaning staff earlier and decided they might have the key to the pool gates or, at the very least, information about what could be happening. Kevin approached the side entrance to the fitness center, the soles of his boots crunching softly against the gravel. The door was locked, as he expected, but a faint glow from inside indicated the cleaners were still nearby. He knocked firmly, hoping to get their attention. The muffled noise of the screeches continued, persistent and unwavering, as though it were pressing against the very walls of the complex. A sense of unease settled over him as he waited, his mind racing through the possibilities. The sound was too erratic to be a recording, too desperate to be a prank. Yet the enclosed nature of the pool area made it seem impossible for someone to have gotten inside without being noticed. The questions churned in his mind, each more unsettling than the last. As the oppressive weight of the situation began to sink in, he turned back to the wall, his flashlight beam catching the edge of the gate leading into the pool area. It was locked tight, the heavy iron bars showing no signs of tampering. The padlock glinted dully in the light, a silent testament to the impenetrability of the enclosure. Yet the cries persisted, cutting through the stillness like a knife. Kevin scanned the surrounding area one last time, his determination growing. Someone was in trouble, and he wasn't about to let a brick wall stand in his way. The cries were louder now, almost tangible in their intensity, echoing through the night like a haunting refrain. Whatever was happening beyond that wall demanded his attention, and he knew he had to act quickly. Kevin moved with purpose along the perimeter of the fitness center, his flashlight beam flickering across the ground as he searched for an opening into the pool area. The cries continued, loud and guttural, slicing through the oppressive stillness of the night. The sound seemed to amplify with each passing second, as though the source of the distress was growing more frantic. The echoes rebounded off the walls and nearby buildings, making it difficult to discern the exact location. The locked gate offered no alternative, and Kevin's frustration began to mount. The brick wall surrounding the pool was tall, smooth, and designed to deter anyone from climbing over it. There was no easy way in, and every moment wasted felt like a betrayal of his duty. He ran his flashlight along the length of the gate, searching for a flaw in its design. But the iron bars were solid, the padlock unyielding. The sound shifted subtly, morphing from incoherent wails to what could only be described as a scream for help. The single word, though faint and distorted, sent a jolt through Kevin's chest. There was no mistaking it now. This was not an animal or a prank. Someone was inside the pool area, and they were in trouble. He immediately reached for his radio and called for backup, his voice calm but firm, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. Minutes later, the distant glow of headlights appeared, cutting through the darkness as another officer arrived. Together, they approached the fitness center, where the cleaning staff emerged again, their expressions a mix of confusion and unease. With their assistance, the officers gained entry to the building and navigated through the dimly lit gym, the cries of distress guiding their every step. The interior of the fitness center was cavernous and silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the echo of their footsteps. The weight machines and treadmills stood like silent sentinels, their shapes looming in the semi-darkness. Kevin and his partner moved quickly, their focus on reaching the doors at the back of the building that led to the pool area. The sound grew louder as they neared, reverberating through the walls with an almost otherworldly quality. When they finally pushed open the heavy glass doors, they were met with a wave of oppressive silence. The outdoor pool complex stretched before them, bathed in the dim glow of a few security lights. Two large poles dominated the space, their still surfaces reflecting the pale light like mirrors. Beyond them, a smaller pool with water slides and cabanas lay shrouded in shadow. Kevin stepped onto the concrete deck, his boots making a faint scuffing sound as he advanced. His flashlight beam swept across the area, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. The cries had ceased momentarily, leaving behind an eerie stillness that heightened the tension. The air was thick and warm, pressing down on them like a physical weight. The two officers split up, each methodically searching the pool area. Kevin approached the lap pool, peering into the water for any signs of movement. The surface was calm, undisturbed by even the faintest ripple. He turned his attention to the adjacent recreational pool, its colorful water playground standing eerily silent in the moonlight. There was no sign of anyone. The silence was suddenly shattered by another burst of screams, sharper and more desperate than before. The sound seemed to emanate from the far end of the pool area, near the smaller pool with the water slides. Kevin's heart raced as he motioned for his partner to follow. They moved quickly across the deck, their flashlights bobbing with each step. Reaching the smaller pool, they stopped and scanned the area. Two slides curved into the shallow water, a blue open-top slide and a red tube slide. Kevin's attention was drawn to the red slide, its enclosed design offering the perfect place for someone to hide or become trapped. The cries seemed to originate from within its shadowy depths. Kevin advanced cautiously, his flashlight aimed at the mouth of the slide. The tube was wide enough for a person to fit inside, but from his vantage point, he couldn't see beyond the first curve. The sound rose again, echoing through the air with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. It was coming from within the slide, of that he was certain. His partner remained at the base of the slide while Kevin began to ascend the stairs leading to the platform at the top. The steel steps clanged beneath his boots, each step taking him closer to the unknown. As he reached the top, he crouched to peer into the tube, his flashlight casting a narrow beam of light into the darkness. The tube twisted and turned, obscuring his view, but the cries were deafening now, filling the confined space with a haunting resonance. Kevin's instincts screamed at him to proceed with caution, but the urgency of the situation left no room for hesitation. He gripped his flashlight tightly and prepared to enter the slide, the cries echoing around him as he moved closer to what he feared would be a grim discovery. Kevin stood at the top of the red slide, his flashlight illuminating the hollow interior. The slide curved downward into darkness, its glossy surface reflecting the light in jagged, distorted streaks. The cries, now louder and more guttural, seemed to resonate from somewhere deep inside. The sound carried an unnatural quality, reverberating through the enclosed space as if bouncing off unseen walls. He scanned the area again, but the slide's twists and turns obscured any view beyond the immediate entrance. The platform where he stood was elevated above the rest of the pool area, offering a vantage point over the complex. From this height, he could see the vast expanse of the two larger pools, their surfaces calm and undisturbed under the dim glow of the security lights. The surrounding cabanas and lounge chairs cast long shadows across the deck, giving the space an unsettling stillness. Yet, the source of the cries was unmistakably close, emanating from the very structure he was standing on. Kevin crouched low and shone his flashlight deeper into the red slide. The smooth walls of the tube reflected the beam in harsh, irregular patterns, but no movement or figure was visible. He leaned further in, straining to hear beyond the eerie echoes, but the only sound was the continuous wailing, desperate and chilling. The sound seemed to swell and fade, as though the source were shifting position, but the confined nature of the slide distorted its origin. He straightened and turned to glance down at his partner, who remained stationed at the base of the slide, scanning the surrounding area. The open-top blue slide next to them stood in stark contrast to the enclosed red slide, its winding curves fully exposed. Kevin shifted his attention momentarily to the blue slide but dismissed it. The cries were too muffled, too contained, to be coming from anything but the tubular red slide. Descending into the slide seemed the only logical course of action, but Kevin's unease grew with each passing moment. He had no visual confirmation of anyone inside, yet the sound was undeniable. The cries carried an urgency that demanded action, their raw intensity clawing at his instincts. He turned back to the slide, steeling himself for what lay ahead. At the base of the red slide, his partner had begun to ascend, likely to meet him midway and cover both ends. Kevin noted the movement below and took a deep breath before lowering himself into the slide's entrance. The interior was tighter than he anticipated, the curved walls pressing uncomfortably close. His flashlight barely illuminated the path ahead, the light swallowed by the sharp twists and turns of the slide. He inched forward, the rubber soles of his boots gripping the slick surface as he navigated the slope. The cries grew louder, their pitch climbing to an almost unbearable level. The confined space amplified the sound, making it feel as though it were coming from every direction at once. Kevin pressed on, his flashlight cutting through the darkness in search of any sign of the source. The slide curved sharply, forcing Kevin to adjust his movements to maintain balance. His flashlight beam flickered momentarily, casting erratic shadows along the walls. The cries seemed impossibly close now, vibrating through the slide like a physical force. Yet no figure or object appeared in the narrow path ahead. Meanwhile, his partner was making steady progress upward from the base of the slide. The two officers were on a collision course, converging toward the center where the slide's twists began to even out. Kevin paused momentarily, scanning his surroundings once more. The air felt heavier here, the sound more concentrated, but the space was empty save for the smooth, polished walls of the slide. As the two officers finally met in the middle, their flashlights crossed beams, illuminating the interior in overlapping patterns. They exchanged glances, their expressions mirroring the growing sense of confusion and unease. The cries continued to echo around them, yet the slide remained inexplicably empty. Kevin turned his flashlight toward the direction he had come from, retracing the beam along the curved path. The surface of the slide gleamed in the artificial light, unbroken and pristine. He shifted the light forward again, scanning the path toward the base where his partner had started. The result was the same: nothing. The source of the cries was nowhere to be found. The two officers carefully maneuvered past each other, completing their search of the slide's interior. With each step, the cries seemed to taunt them, their intensity growing even as their origin became more elusive. By the time they reached the ends of the slide and exited, the sound had shifted again, now echoing faintly from somewhere beyond the pool area. Standing at the base of the slide, Kevin glanced back toward the smaller pool, his flashlight sweeping over the still water. The cries had moved, their distorted echoes creating an auditory illusion that left him grasping for answers. The pool complex was vast, the towering brick wall casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. Somewhere within that space, someone or something was still screaming. Kevin emerged from the red slide, his steps deliberate and heavy as his mind wrestled with the inexplicable emptiness of the search. The cries that had lured them inside continued unabated, echoing across the pool area with a haunting resonance. He scanned the surroundings once again, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. But there was no movement, no sign of anyone who might be responsible for the sounds. The stark stillness of the pool complex only deepened the growing unease. He walked toward his partner, who had descended from the slide with the same confusion etched across his face. The cries had shifted once again, their source now appearing to come from somewhere farther away, beyond the immediate vicinity of the slides. Kevin turned his attention to the blue slide beside them, its open-top design glinting faintly under the dim security lights. Unlike the red slide, the blue slide offered no places to hide, no shadows in which someone could conceal themselves. Yet something about it drew his focus. Kevin climbed the short stairs leading to the top of the blue slide, his flashlight in hand. The open, corkscrew design of the slide allowed him to see its curves and turns as they spiraled downward toward the shallow pool below. The cries, though distorted and faint, seemed to reverberate through the structure, as though the slide itself were amplifying the sound. He leaned over the edge of the platform, scanning the area below, but the pool's surface remained undisturbed, its stillness a stark contrast to the chaos of the night. Determined to rule out every possibility, Kevin stepped onto the smooth surface of the blue slide and began his descent. The open design allowed him a clearer view of his surroundings as he moved, his flashlight beam tracing the curves of the slide and the deck below. The cries grew louder with each step, their intensity building as he rounded the tight corkscrew turns. He paused midway down the slide, crouching slightly to steady himself as he scanned the pool area from his elevated position. It was then that he noticed something unusual. Just below him, near the base of the slide, was a metal support beam that extended from the ground to the structure above. The beam was wide and cylindrical, its surface painted a dull gray that blended into the shadows. From his vantage point, Kevin could see the top of the beam, which appeared to be open, a dark void that disappeared into its hollow interior. The cries seemed to emanate from somewhere near the beam, their echoing quality subtly making sense in light of its structure. Kevin narrowed his flashlight beam and aimed it directly into the opening of the support beam. The light revealed a smooth, hollow interior that descended straight into darkness. He leaned further over the edge of the slide, angling the flashlight to get a better view. As the beam penetrated deeper into the void, a flash of movement caught his eye. He froze, his grip tightening on the edge of the slide as he adjusted the light. Deep within the beam, a figure was wedged tightly, its body contorted unnaturally within the narrow confines. The figure was a man, his gaunt face twisted in agony, his arms pressed tightly against his sides as he struggled against the unyielding walls of the beam. He was naked, his skin slick with sweat and dirt, and his eyes were wide with terror. His mouth opened and closed in a wordless scream, the sound echoing up the beam and dispersing into the night. The cries that had drawn Kevin to the pool area now had a face, and the sight was more horrifying than anything he could have anticipated. The man's body was lodged firmly in the beam, his chest heaving with the effort of breathing in the confined space. Kevin could see the raw abrasions on his skin where the metal had scraped against him as he descended. His legs were wedged at an unnatural angle, and his arms appeared pinned above his head, unable to move. It was clear that he had entered the beam willingly but had quickly become trapped, his situation made worse by the relentless heat radiating from the metal structure. Kevin stepped back from the edge of the slide, his mind racing. The cries that had seemed so inexplicable moments ago were now horrifyingly real. A desperate plea for help from a man caught in an unimaginable predicament. The pool complex, which had seemed empty and lifeless, now revealed itself as the site of a grim and tragic event. Somewhere in the shadows of the night, this man had made a decision that led him into the depths of the beam, and now his life hung by a thread. The oppressive heat of the Arizona night pressed down on Kevin as he considered his next move. The situation was dire, and every second counted. The man's cries grew weaker, his voice cracking under the strain, and Kevin knew they had little time to act. The pool area, once a place of recreation and joy, had become the stage for a chilling and desperate struggle for survival. The sound of the man's screams echoed in Kevin's ears as he turned to signal for assistance, his flashlight beam cutting once more through the darkness. Kevin descended the slide quickly, his boots sliding slightly on the smooth surface as he navigated the tight curves. The cries from the support beam below were fading, each screech weaker than the last. The man's desperate, raw voice seemed to struggle against the oppressive night, as if the very air was conspiring to drown him out. Kevin's mind raced with grim possibilities as he reached the bottom and hurried toward the base of the beam. The support beam stood stark and unyielding, its cylindrical form rising like a cold monument from the ground to the towering slides above. Kevin directed his flashlight upward, tracing its length to the open top where the man had entered. The hollow interior was dark and forbidding, its narrow space revealing only the faintest glimpse of the trapped figure's contorted body. His limbs were pressed tightly against the walls of the beam, and his chest barely moved with shallow, labored breaths. The surrounding air was heavy and stifling, the heat of the Arizona night radiating from every surface. The metal beam itself was warm to the touch, the day's sun still lingering in its core. Kevin could only imagine the suffocating heat inside the confined space where the man was trapped. The heat wave that had gripped the city for days had turned the beam into a veritable furnace, and the man's sweat-slicked skin glistened faintly in the light. Kevin studied the beam's base, searching for any access point or opening that might allow them to reach the trapped man. It was sealed tight, the solid metal offering no obvious entry or handhold. The man's body was wedged so firmly that any movement seemed impossible. His arms were pinned above his head, his shoulders compressed by the unyielding walls, and his legs twisted beneath him. Every inch of him seemed locked in place, a grim testament to the impossibility of his escape. Rescue crews arrived within minutes, their vehicles pulling up to the edge of the pool complex with lights flashing. Paramedics and firefighters moved quickly, assessing the situation as they gathered tools and equipment. The scene was tense and hurried, the urgency of the man's plight hanging heavily in the air. Kevin stepped back to allow the professionals room to work, though his eyes remained fixed on the beam, unwilling to look away from the man's desperate struggle. The first attempts to free him involved lowering a rope into the beam, hoping he could grasp it and pull himself upward. Rescuers tied knots along the rope's length, providing handholds to assist his climb. The rope was carefully threaded down to him, but his arms remained immobile, pinned so tightly against the walls that he couldn't lift them to grab hold. His weakened state rendered even the slightest effort impossible. The rope dangled uselessly in front of him, a cruel reminder of his helplessness. The heat inside the beam intensified as the hours passed, the metal structure absorbing the ambient warmth of the night. Rescuers rigged a fan to blow cool air into the beam's opening, but the effort provided only minimal relief. The man's cries grew fainter, his voice hoarse and cracked from dehydration and exhaustion. The haunting echoes of his earlier screams lingered in the air, a ghostly reminder of the urgency that had brought them all here. Engineers on the scene devised a plan to dismantle the beam, carefully cutting through its base to free the man. The process was delicate and slow, requiring precision to avoid further endangering him. Sparks flew as saws and torches bit into the metal, the screech of machinery mingling with the tense murmurs of the rescuers. The team worked tirelessly, their movements deliberate yet hurried as the minutes stretched into hours. Throughout the ordeal, Kevin remained close, his flashlight in hand as he observed the desperate efforts to save the man. The heat pressed down on him, a suffocating weight that seemed to sap the strength from his body. He could only imagine the torment of the trapped figure, his body contorted and confined, his mind likely slipping between fear and resignation as the hours dragged on. As dawn approached, the beam finally gave way, its severed base collapsing with a dull metallic thud. Rescuers moved quickly, pulling the man's lifeless body from the hollow cylinder. The scene fell silent, the weight of their failure heavy in the air. The man's skin was blistered from the heat, his limbs stiff from the unnatural position in which he had been trapped. Paramedics confirmed what everyone already knew. He was gone. The rescue had come too late, the combined effects of the oppressive heat and his prolonged entrapment proving insurmountable. The lifeless body of Ryan Kelly, a 32-year-old man who had made the ill-fated decision to enter the beam, lay as a grim reminder of the night's events. The once bustling pool complex now felt like a hollow shell, its silence broken only by the distant hum of machinery as the team packed up their equipment. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, the pool area was transformed from an eerie nighttime scene to a stark tableau of exhaustion and urgency. The rescue crews, now numbering in the dozens, worked methodically around the towering support beam, their faces set with determination. The hollow structure that had entrapped Ryan Kelly had become the focal point of a desperate and grueling effort to save his life. Firefighters, paramedics, and engineers had spent hours assessing the situation, running through every conceivable strategy to extract the man without further harm. The oppressive heat of the Arizona night had given way to the rising temperatures of the day, intensifying the already dire conditions. The beam itself radiated warmth, a cruel testament to the sun's unrelenting grip on the metal cylinder. Ryan's cries had grown weaker and more sporadic as the hours dragged on. The haunting screeches that had first drawn Sergeant Kevin Bingham to the scene had faded to faint moans, barely audible even from the top of the beam. His body, slick with sweat and pinned in an unnatural position, was visibly deteriorating under the strain. The rescuers were keenly aware that time was not on their side. The first attempts to free Ryan involved creating makeshift tools to reach him. Long poles with hooks and loops were lowered into the beam, designed to latch onto his arms or shoulders and help pull him upward. The narrow confines of the cylinder, however, made maneuvering these tools nearly impossible. Each attempt to lift him was met with failure, as the sharp angles of the beam prevented any meaningful leverage. Ryan's weakened state rendered him incapable of assisting in his rescue, his arms limp and his body motionless save for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. The team then tried to widen the opening at the top of the beam, hoping to create enough space to extract him. Cutting torches were brought in, their flames casting sharp shadows across the pool deck as sparks rained down. The noise of metal being severed filled the air, mingling with the murmurs of the rescue team and the faint sound of Ryan's labored breathing. The heat inside the beam, already stifling, grew even more intense as the cutting work continued. Despite their best efforts, the metal refused to yield quickly. The beam's structural integrity and thickness made progress slow and painstaking. The rescuers shifted their focus to the base of the beam, hoping to dismantle it from the ground up. Engineers mapped out a plan to sever the supports anchoring the beam to the concrete, a process that required precision to avoid causing a collapse that could harm Ryan further. Heavy machinery was brought in, and the rhythmic pounding of drills and saws echoed across the complex. The ground around the base of the beam was cleared, exposing the bolts and welds that secured it. Sparks flew as workers attacked the metal with grinding tools, their faces hidden behind protective masks. The beam quivered slightly with each cut, a nerve-wracking reminder of the delicate balance between success and catastrophe. As the hours passed, the rescue crew's urgency grew palpable. Paramedics stood ready with stretchers and medical equipment, prepared to stabilize Ryan the moment he was freed. The heat of the day pressed down on everyone, sweat soaking through their uniforms as they worked tirelessly to bring him to safety. Each person on the scene was acutely aware of the stakes, their movements driven by a collective determination to prevent a tragedy. At one point, a crane was brought in to assist with lifting the beam once the base had been severed. The massive machine loomed over the pool area, its arm extending like a mechanical savior. Chains were attached to the top of the beam, and the crane operator carefully adjusted the tension, ready to lift the structure away in a single, controlled motion. The operation required coordination from every member of the team, each step choreographed to minimize risk. Finally, after hours of grueling effort, the final bolts were cut, and the beam was declared ready for removal. The crane roared to life, its arms straining as it began to lift the hollow cylinder from its position. The ground trembled slightly as the beam was raised inch by inch, revealing the full extent of its depth. The rescuers stood poised, their eyes fixed on the opening as they prepared to retrieve Ryan. When the beam was fully lifted, the rescuers moved in swiftly, their hands and tools working in concert to extract the man from his confinement. The stretcher was brought forward, and paramedics knelt beside Ryan's motionless form. The silence that followed was deafening, a heavy weight settling over the scene as the rescuers realized their efforts had come too late. Ryan's body, bruised and blistered from the intense heat, bore the marks of his ordeal. His lifeless form was carefully lifted onto the stretcher, the team moving with a somber efficiency that spoke to their shared grief. The beam, now a hollow shell, stood as a silent witness to the tragedy, its cold surface reflecting the first full light of day. The rescue attempt had ended, but the haunting echoes of Ryan's cries lingered in the air, a reminder of the fragility of life and the relentless power of circumstance. The pool area was eerily quiet in the aftermath of the rescue attempt. The hum of machinery had ceased, leaving only the faint rustle of the early morning breeze and the muted murmurs of the rescue crew as they packed their equipment. The once vibrant and recreational space now seemed like a solemn monument to the tragedy that had unfolded. The beam, now dismantled and lying in sections on the ground, bore the weight of its grim history, a stark reminder of the night's events. Kevin stood near the edge of the smaller pool, his flashlight now dangling loosely from his hand. The adrenaline that had carried him through the night had drained away, leaving an emptiness he couldn't shake. His eyes traced the length of the pool area, taking in the scattered tools, the scuffed concrete, and the solemn faces of the rescue team. Every detail seemed sharper in the light of dawn, each one pressing against his mind like an unrelenting weight. The man's name had been confirmed: Ryan Kelly, 32 years old. He had entered the pool area sometime before midnight, climbing over the 12-foot brick wall that now seemed like a futile barrier. Naked and under the influence of methamphetamine, Ryan's actions had been erratic and senseless, yet tragically human in their desperation. The hollow support beam that had become his tomb was not a space designed for human entry, its narrow confines making it impossible for anyone to escape once inside. Kevin replayed the events of the night in his mind, each detail etched vividly into his memory. The unrelenting cries that had drawn him to the scene, the fruitless search through the slides, and the moment of discovery. All of it seemed to blur together, forming a tapestry of confusion and horror. The cries had felt like a lifeline, a desperate plea from someone teetering on the edge of survival. To now stand here, knowing that Ryan's life had slipped away despite every effort, was a crushing realization. The autopsy report would later confirm what Kevin and the others had already suspected. The combination of intense heat and methamphetamine in Ryan's bloodstream had proven lethal. His body had been unable to withstand the oppressive conditions inside the beam, the metal acting as a conductor for the day's unyielding heat. Trapped, dehydrated, and unable to move, Ryan had suffered in ways Kevin could hardly imagine. For the rescue crews, the frustration was palpable. They had worked tirelessly, employing every tool and strategy at their disposal, only to be met with insurmountable obstacles. The structural integrity of the beam, the delicate process of dismantling it, and Ryan's weakening condition had all conspired against them. Each member of the team carried the weight of the failure, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief as they gathered their equipment. The pool complex itself seemed transformed by the events of the night. The once pristine deck was marked with the signs of chaos: scratched surfaces, discarded tools, and the dark stains of oil and debris from the rescue effort. The cabanas and lounge chairs stood as silent witnesses, their clean lines now appearing stark and cold against the backdrop of tragedy. The calm, reflective surface of the pools seemed almost accusatory, a sharp contrast to the turmoil that had unfolded around them. Kevin found himself walking toward the dismantled beam, his steps slow and deliberate. The sections of metal lay scattered across the concrete, their edges jagged and sharp from the cutting tools. He crouched down beside one of the pieces, running his hand along its surface. The metal was warm to the touch, its temperature a faint echo of the heat that had claimed Ryan's life. He could see the faint smudges of sweat and dirt where Ryan's body had pressed against the interior, a haunting reminder of the man's final moments. The morning light grew brighter, casting long shadows across the complex as the sun rose higher in the sky. The rescue crews began to depart, their vehicles pulling away one by one, leaving behind only silence and a few scattered remnants of their effort. Kevin remained where he was, staring at the empty space where the beam had once stood. He felt the weight of the night pressing down on him, the knowledge that despite all their efforts, they had been unable to save Ryan. The pool area would eventually be cleaned, its surfaces scrubbed and its features restored to their original state. The slides would gleam under the sun once more, and the laughter of children and families would fill the air. But for Kevin, the events of the night would linger, a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the unrelenting power of chance. The cries that had pierced the darkness would echo in his mind, a haunting refrain that would not be easily silenced.